How Billy Graham became the How Billy Graham became the most famous preacher in America. CNN. Billy Graham was having doubts in his ministry, in his rock-ribbed Christian faith, in himself. At age 30, he was president of a small Christian college in Minnesota. But he was better known as the skinny preacher with the booming voice who crisscrossed the country leading evangelistic crusades. Lately though, the size and ardor of the crowds had begun to wane. After a flop in Altoona, Pennsylvania, Graham was almost ready to call it quits. It was sorriest crusade we ever had, his longtime friend and colleague Grady Wilson once remarked. Even more troubling for Graham, a fellow preacher had been peppering him with questions about the trustworthiness of the Bible, hammering tracks in the bedrock of his faith. Graham died on Wednesday at age 99. Presidents and pastors mourned his death, calling the evangelist one of this country's most successful and beloved preachers. But in August of 1949, Billy Graham was just another lost soul, climbing the mountain. Handsome and charismatic, Charles Templeton was every bit the evangelist as Graham. The two friends traveled and preached together during the mid-1940s in the Youth for Christ movement. More intellectually curious than Graham, Templeton had begun to read modern theology, which threw doubt on the historical accuracy of the Bible. He told Graham their faith was flimsy and urged him to study at a top seminary. The two evangelists wouldn't be able to get by on their animal magnetism and youthful enthusiasm forever, Templeton argued. Graham demurred, saying he didn't have a good enough mind to settle deep theological questions. Templeton accused his friend of intellectual suicide. Riled by the slat and racked by doubt, Graham fled to Forest Home, a Christian retreat center tucked into Southern California's San Bernardino Mountains. There, he wandered among the 12 pines and wrestled with his misgivings. Graham sat on a tree stump and opened his Bible on a big rock. He prayed and pondered, pleaded and struggled until, finally, he surrendered, deciding to trust in the authority of the Bible. Doubts be dimmed. A bronze tablet marks the stone of witness at Forest Home. He decided to simply preach the gospel and not worry about the intellectual challenges of the faith, said Randall Ballmer, a professor of American religious history at Dartmouth University. He literally climbed down the mountain and never looked back. The campus cathedral. His faith renewed, Graham poured everything into his next crusade, which began on September 25, 1949, in a Ringling Brothers type tent pitched in downtown Los Angeles. Rigged with 7 poles, a large marquee bearing Graham's intense mien, and a stage Bible propped open to Romans 122, the tent stretched for a city block. Post-war America simmered with spirituality and Bible sales were booming. Some scholars call the period the Third Great Awakening. Television
decided to bestow his considerable blessing on the evangelist. The two men never met. ANHTUBE, famously reclusive, never gave an explanation. Graham's art of anti-communism likely appealed to her. But lots of preachers at the time warned of the Soviet threat, said Martin. One thing is clear, the publicity campaign catapulted Graham into a new realm of fame. It was an enormous boost, said Ballmer, if for no other reason than it gave credibility, which brought money to the ministry. It also brought multitudes to the canvas. Graham's attendance spiked to 6,000 the night, with hundreds more thronged outside the tent. As organizers extended the crusade to accommodate the growing crowd, a sign hoisted on the marquee proclaimed, "Something's happening inside." Continuing another week, if for no other reason. But even Graham didn't quite know what that something was. "You better get back out here real fast," he told a friend in Chicago, "because something has broken out that is way beyond me." In the Crusade's 8th and smashing week, Graham ran out of sermons and had to ask friends for suggestions. An inspired bit of borrowing. One night he preached 18th century evangelist Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon, "Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God," nearly word for word, he told a friend in Chicago. By the time the crusade ended on November 28, 1949, 350,000 people had heard Graham preach at the Canvas Cathedral, and 3,000 had heeded the call to devote their lives to Christ. According to the Believe Graham Evangelistic Association, untold millions read and heard about the crusade, making Graham a lifelong believer in the power of the press. To commemorate the crusade, Graham's association keeps a mural-sized photograph of the Canvas Cathedral at its headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. They regard that crusade as the changing of the water into wine, said Martin. It's hard to overstate the effects of the crusade, and its media coverage, on Graham's ministry. I don't think there's any question that it's what thrust him into the national consciousness, said Martin. Consider the following example. In 1948, the year before the Los Angeles Crusade, 65,000 people came to hear Graham preach. In 1950, that number rose to 1.8 million, and continued to crest for decades. As for Charles Templeton, unlike his friend, he attended Princeton Theological Seminary. He later left the ministry and gained prominence as a journalist in Canada. But he lost his Christian faith, saying he couldn't believe the Bible anymore. He died an agnostic. In 1950, that number rose to 1.8 million, and continued to crest for decades. As for Charles Templeton, unlike his friend, he attended Princeton Theological Seminary. He later left the ministry and gained prominence as a journalist in Canada. But he lost his Christian faith, saying he couldn't believe the Bible anymore. He died an agnostic. In 1950, that number rose to 1.8 million, and continued to crest for decades. As for Charles Templeton, unlike his friend, he attended Princeton Theological Seminary.